What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk about a topic that a lot of the media seems to have a high opinion of, and they all seem to have the same opinion of, and nothing ever seems to look at the different contexts of that. And today I want to talk about U.S. and Iranian relationships, but in particular, Iran's right to own nuclear weapons. So I'll kind of go into why I think they deserve the right to have nuclear weapons. Now you can agree or disagree with me, but the facts still remain as such. To give a little history of Iran and the United States, Iran and the United States never really had the biggest relationship prior to World War II until the UK and the Soviets invaded Iran because they believed they were supplying the Axis with oil at the time, which we can pretty much assume that they invaded because they had oil, not because they were providing the Axis with hypothetical oil. But the U.S. never really had that big of an interest in there. They realized that they had oil, but at the time, the U.S. didn't really care if they had other things they had to take care of at the moment. It wasn't until 1953 when the first and also last secular and democratically elected leader was put into power, and then immediately within weeks, almost a month, they was overthrown by UK and US-backed coalition coup led by Dwight Eisenhower, which set them back decades and led to years and years of repression and religious repression, which also brings to the thought that in 1983, because they were set back so far and free speech was set back, and this is just a right-wing nationalist Islamic government, that in 1983 the U.S. kind of told Iran more or less about the horrors of quote-unquote communism and socialism, and in 83 there was mass executions of the communist and left-wing parties, and kind of purged that from all Iranian political discourse. In 88, the U.S. shot down, and this is kind of when tensions, if they weren't already built up, they were definitely going to start building up at this point, was when Flight 655 from Iran was shot down by a U.S. naval carrier outside on the Persian Gulf, and they resulted in the deaths of, what was the number? I have it written down here. 290 civilians, which included 66 children. The U.S. said they thought this was a military warfighter heading towards their ship. Evidence proves that that's not even true, that the plane wasn't even headed towards them or headed away from them. But it's pretty obvious that they were just slaughtering civilians just to show flights of muscle. Which brings us to 2016, during the beginning of the Trump administration, where he put on sweeping sanctions of Iran, which pretty much removed them from the global power in the Middle East, and also removed their arms industry, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which was kind of like their secret police in their specialized military force, their nuclear industry, their energy and petroleum industry, their banking, and also their central bank in Iran, which is kind of like their Federal Reserve in a way, their shipping industry, that would go towards wherever their allies were, which were very few. Their international trade was completely cut off, so they're kind of isolated now, also geographically and economically. Their foreign insurance policies, as well as medicine and aid to humanitarian crisis going on in there. It makes you think, why wouldn't Iran want to have nuclear arms? If all these shit is just happening to them, why would they not want to have nuclear arms to defend themselves? Places that have been bombed by the U.S. in the Middle East include Lebanon, Libya. Libya is not really in the Middle East, it's in Northern Africa, but it's relevant because it's close enough to where it's that kind of Islamic borderline along the Mediterranean. Iran in 88, 98, and then now 2020, earlier 2020, Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan, and Syria. All these places did not have nuclear arms, so the U.S. took full advantage of that. Places that have not been bombed by the United States include places like Egypt, though not bombed, multiple coups have been backed and staged there. Beirut, Turkey, Jordan, Israel, Pakistan, and India, though not in the Middle East, still relevant because they're close enough to Pakistan and Afghanistan. So what does this all mean? Well, it brings up the thought, like I mentioned earlier, why shouldn't Iran have nuclear arms? They're being constantly sanctions swept on them, and the United States and the UN still think they have nuclear weapons, even though the Iran nuclear deal showed by third-party investigations from, I believe it was Sweden or Norway, I can't remember which one it was, that their nuclear program was at nil. It was zero. There was nothing being produced, and they were following the regulations to a T. But the U.S. still put on more and more sanctions and backed out of the deal, and now Joe Biden's also doing it as well. So it begs the question, what's stopping the United States from invading Iran? Because if they don't have, nuclear weapons, they can invade anytime they want, and what's going to stop them? Their minuscule, probably less than 1% size army compared to the United States. They spend virtually nothing in U.S. dollars on it, versus when we're spending multiple trillions of dollars on ours. They probably spend a few billion compared to our multi-trillion, in U.S. dollars, that is. Excuse me. Now, if they had nuclear weapons, they could defend themselves. Credit, in a perfect world, nobody should have nuclear weapons. But also, what's stopping, Israel and Saudi Arabia, who both have nuclear weapons, and the two largest militaries in Iran, as well as Turkey, because Turkey will listen to a lot of what the U.S. has to say when it's important, What's stopping those countries from coming in and taking over Iran and stealing all their oil and just having mass repression? Well, nothing, unless they have a nuclear arms, which can deter and use it strictly as defensive. Now, Iran has been quite repressive over the last couple of decades. And by decades, I mean probably even say half a century, since their only secular democratic leader was overthrown in a coup. But it begs the question, why and what reason do we have to tell another country like Iran, which is nothing compared to even Saudi Arabia and Israel, and you could even say Syria pre, ISIS and rebels being, funded by the United States. So I just wanted to get that off my head, because it seems that everyone has an opinion on Iran, but no one seems to have solutions or even wants to see the concepts of, the Iranians government or even the Iranians themselves.